Okay, great. So our next panel will be on mechanism design, making the common good profitable to individuals. Before we head into the panel, I just wanted to give a brief reminder about lunch. So this will be the last session for our morning program. The program will continue at 2 p.m. today, and there'll be 3 different ways you can participate. So the keynotes and the panels will remain here. Meanwhile, the participation sessions will take place this afternoon on the second floor of this location, as well as the building across the courtyard. So please do see an organizing team member if you need any help or directions. But this panel will specifically discuss tackling issues hinging on crafting the right economic incentives, asking the questions, how can we construct markets that drive sustainability and curb value extraction by speculators, and can we create fresh incentives to nurture collaboration? So I'll hand it over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Kaylin. Yeah, let's continue the conversation about the rules of the game, the incentives we can create, and I have some brilliant guests for this discussion, Alp and Cem. Maybe we start with an introduction. Cem, please tell us what you do today, and maybe also what brought you to this idea of designing mechanisms.
Yeah, sure. Does this work? Can you hear me? Testing, yeah. So what I do today, if I would start from now and work backwards, I'm now working on a protocol for verifiable machine learning with the intention that we can take machine learning and interoperate it with Web3, with smart contracts that require a whole different set of trust assumptions or trust guarantees. But what got me here is like, as you said, with many turning points along the way, my original curiosity was around organization theory, where during university I was studying this notion of skunk works of Lockheed Martin, which is like, one of the biggest arms manufacturer in the world, who is getting budget from Ministry of Defense in the US to build gigantic projects. And this Skunkworks project was a great example for how organizational design could have radical shifts in outcomes. And that's when I realized that, impacting the world, revolution, it needs to have organization design as a medium. Then I found, Ethereum white paper, and shortly thereafter, papers about DAOs, sort of showing the vision of programmability in organization design. So, since then I, have been convinced that the kernel for any type of social economic reformation is in programmable organizations as we move on to this digital first presence of sociality. Here we are.
And you are co-founder of Curve Labs. Maybe you speak a little bit about Curve Labs as well.
Curve Labs is sort of an outcome of early stages of my DAO builder experience, where I have had the experience of working with DAO protocols that were that had a very strong thesis and that wanted to create society or collaboration in that image, that white paper as sort of social vision. I got extremely burnt out from this type of methodology because society is extremely complex, and these type of theses, especially driven by some kind of startup culture, it usually falls short of accommodating these social complexities. So Curve Labs was an attempt at creating a mechanism design laboratory that was less married with solutions, but more engaged with problems. So and these problems were ranging from many different verticals, from the cultural sector, how can we innovate with mechanisms of funding artistic research, cultural production, to decentralized science, how do we create new universities at the age when we can search different type of biological vectors with machine learning, and how do we incentivize production of and collaboration on that level. So Curve Labs has been an amazing experience to sort of demonolithically engage with all these interesting questions.
Awesome, thanks. Alp,
Yes.
you are co-founder of Inverter Network. So tell us a little bit about what you do there and also what brought you to mechanism design.
Of course. Yeah, so like in Inverter, what we try to do is like in general, we realize this design pattern in most of the applications and products in Web3, and we realized that like the composability on the smart contract layer weren't really interchangeable in general. So we designed like this protocol architecture where you could drag and drop smart contract functionalities, so it makes smart contract functionalities reusable. That will enable you to kind of design mechanisms in a more robust way and be able to operate them in real life, such as like you can integrate smart contracts to ERP systems and NRP systems and be able to design without spending like 6-7 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
What's an RP for?
So like ERP systems in general, we believe in businesses, you have this working capital systems, for example, to manage your spending of raw materials that you purchase, to create like the supply chain management system for circular economies, or you have NPR systems where like you need to coordinate with other companies, such as if you do any transportation, you would like to know what other trucks, for example, passing through the ways that you need distribution, so you can coordinate with them to optimize your spending and your cost when it comes to supply chain management systems. And so like we built Inverter to be able to kind of build designs and mechanisms that will enable organizations more like control their, like multi-layered coordination around production, goods, and like coordination between people, human resources, etc. And the way that I ended up in Web3 was also like organizational theory to a certain extent, but it was a bit more ideological for me personally. It was around like programmable institutions.
Mm-hmm.
I went to United States like when I was 16 years old through an exchange program, and since then I've been living outside of Turkey, and being a Turkish person, you had to go through a lot of systemic biases that was implemented, that prevents you to obtain specific kind of like freedom in terms of human rights, even I would argue. And I realized that these systemic biases were implemented through institutions in developed countries, and there are currently like 195 countries in the world where 152 of them are developing. So if we could enable, some kind of a system where people, peers could participate into programming institutions, we could enable a more fair and equitable society where the problems that are regional can be solved within the regional coordination. And that's what also drew me to mechanism design personally.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. I'd like to add what brought me to mechanism design is human irrationality. I was in renewable energies before I joined Web3, and we were exploring how attractive electrical cars are long before Tesla. And we found out that we found a group that were really into electrical cars and renting them out and preferred them over the traditional cars back then. And then when we asked why, what the motivation was, we thought that this is an intrinsic motivation to save the environment, right? To reduce air pollution and so on. But in fact, what we found is that they told us they like this acceleration. It's such a mad experience to drive an electrical car because the insane mode that Tesla then later implemented it. So the motivation to do things were entirely different, obviously, from what we expected. And this is what I call the human irrationality, the irrationality in motivations. Still, with mechanism design, we can find ways to coordinate. And it's fascinating to see people, millions of people, trust and operate in blockchain systems that are purely steered by code, and that we can steer communities in a certain direction just with incentive design and code, rules embedded in code. And it doesn't actually matter why you do things, and we don't want to control your motivation, or we don't want to control what you are envisioning to achieve. That's not the thing. And I think this is the freedom we are talking about. It's the coordination around shared goals. And there might be so many facets to it. And of course, this is also a matter of organizational design, what people hoping to find, how to coordinate, how to build up institutions with legitimacy without setting the boundaries too narrow. And also, I guess also a challenge in the DAO we see today, these burnout effects. Healthy DAOs, still a challenge. Mechanism design. Maybe we can discuss a little bit good examples of mechanism design to make this a little bit more tangible, what mechanism design is and what it can be, how to build such systems. Maybe Alp, let's start. We discussed a little bit good examples.
Yeah, of course. So during, I was telling inside to Angela and Jem before. So in 2018, there was this data that came out, I remember in the European Union, which kind of mentioned the food waste within that year, which was 81 million tons. And 50, if I'm not wrong, 70 million tons of food was wasted because they were ugly, which means that European Union has this food standard that says if a banana has 2 heads, you cannot sell it in retail markets, etc. Even though they maintain full nutritious level, you can eat it, it's very nutritious, it's beautiful, but you have to throw it out or you have to make an animal food because it doesn't match with the food standards, which is understandable, but it's 81 million tons of food again being wasted a year out of 25 countries where we claim there's a hunger in the world. It's kind of a sad thing to have. So during that time, I was doing some kind of startup building with IBM, Hyperledger systems, and what we tried to do back then was how can we basically understand the local farmers and the amount of ugly foods that they were producing, so we could actually work with the food banks to get the ugly foods, collect the ugly foods, turn them into a freeze-dried powder, because if you do freeze-dry operations and keep them in an oxygenless place, a food can maintain its nutrition for over 72 years in general, which is called also space food still. And then we would basically sell them to pharmaceutical companies for meal replacement products. And now, with blockchain technologies, what we're trying to do, for example, that we're still ideating, it's not a solution per se, is how can we incentivize people to submit their data to anywhere where we can actually see the production of goods, the production of food, the waste of food, and the natural waste of food, which is the ugly foods, the raw foods that doesn't really maintain its nutrition level. And one idea was so there's new technologies around smart farms and vertical farms, so you can set sensors and sensoids to be able to track the exact production, exact cost, and potentially the exact revenue that might come from the total production. So right now we're ideating around the bonding curve mechanism, for example, to create a primary issuance of these vertical farms where you can calculate each tray. So each production of let's say strawberry, there are 100 kilograms of strawberry, then these are directly registered in a space where we can also see everyone around that region can see how many strawberries were produced exactly within that month to kind of optimize its also distribution. And the things you can do with this mechanism is in the future, if you can imagine Portugal, if you can actually quantify all the production, food production within a region, now you can actually build supply chain management systems that can reduce food waste incredibly. You can actually create very healthy diets, so you can optimize your food production that goes to the households. You can try to think about systems which could change transportation to a certain extent, so you wouldn't only have, for example, 3 families that control the whole supermarket retail in Germany. You could actually have a lot of farms and local businesses that can operate it. And one of the deals is how can we leverage bonding curve mechanisms to basically issue this representative tokens that can represent production basically of a vertical farm, distribute ownership, and when the sales happen, because we know exact amount of the revenue, we can provide the API like a dividend to the investors of it, and you don't really need to be in that space. You don't need to invest in a company. You don't need to invest in a trusted parties. You can literally trust these mechanisms and see the data, put your money into it, and kind of incentivize the distribution and data collection of food products. So that's the mechanism we're trying to experiment around.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. This was a very tangible, real-world example. And the interesting thing is that bonding curves, who has heard of bonding curves so far? Yes, you know it. So these are the fundamental building blocks for automated market making, so price definition, relations between two or more tokens. And they are implemented in pretty much every single DEX we have today in different variants. So there's this path from designing automated algorithmic markets, then implementing it in monetary systems, then using these primitives for a definition of value in supply chain, and using and reusing these primitives, those who have proven their value and robustness, to different application cases. And this is one example where we see the progress from, as I told you beforehand, the origins of financial markets and this vision of financial digital systems brought to different use cases that have an element of financial economic systems, but are tackling different purposes and problems. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Alp. Cem, you also have a great example, I think, for mechanism design.
Yes. I took your prompt of sort of sharing something that is like playful enough and that demonstrates how a mechanism designer goes from. Maybe it's worth also like defining what mechanism design kind of is on a like theoretical level. So mechanism design is usually presented as the counterparty of game theory, which is like used to, or like the sort of like mathematical modeling methodology for multi-agent strategic situations in order to understand what are likelihoods of certain outcomes and what are the payout functions of those outcomes, who benefits and who loses from those outcomes. So with these, we're able to find equilibria in systems that usually is not visible because we are not able to understand how different agents could operate in different scenarios with each other and responding to each other's decisions. So mechanism design takes this idea of the equilibrium as the prompt itself. So what if we first describe what we want, the scenario that we want to get to, and then build a game around this equilibrium so that people will tend to coordinate towards this outcome, which will become likelier if we design the right game. So in that sense, if you're a mechanism designer, it's very important for you to understand your own objectives and to understand that or to check if they are achievable, and then to keep your mechanism accountable if it's reaching those performance indicators or the outcomes that you are defining for yourself. The playful example that I have is that I worked with a project funded by Creative Europe for redesigning funding mechanisms for circus artists. So these are contemporary circus artists, not the ones who are in those tents and so on, but like more like performing arts, modern dance, these type of amalgamation of that. After a year-long period where we were researching the condition of these artists, and they were sharing why it was such a precarious job to be a circus artist, I have distilled that, first of all, they could only make these risk-taking activities when they're young. So it's similar to football players, like there's a lot of pressure to perform highly when you are younger, and then when you get old, you have almost no financial security. And also that they had to constantly reinvent themselves by restaging a new performance so that they could never have something that would passively feed them. And also that they had no avenues for collaboration. It was either plagiarism or isolated development, isolated creative production. So in the end, I asked, okay, how can we design a game which fixes or tries playfully to engage with those problems. And my design was creating an NFT which choreographers, circus artists can create according to their own tastes, describing their performances, past performances that they have already staged. And these NFTs then went into a crowdfunding campaign where people, audiences, which want to resurrect a certain performance that they found interesting, they would stake a certain amount of Ethereum to these NFTs, and thereby these NFTs with Ethereum on top become bounties, incentives for new artists to take these past performances and create derivatives and bring back to the stage in a new form. So essentially creating a new mode of collaboration between past performances and their derivative new lives. So this is kind of like what makes me interested in the potentiality of mechanism design, especially with open source and Web3 primitives, because it's not only a new way to fundraise, but it's actually creating new relationship between people, between creators, between changing the definition of what it means to be a participant in a system from passive consumption to an active participant in shaping up what the production is in the end. So I think that's the one that's
awesome. Also, thank you for this definition of mechanism design and being fully aware of the goals you'd like to achieve. Today at 2, we'll have a workshop around NFT-based reputation in Web3. And this is another example where we need mechanism design, in this case, to define how to form identity and reputation. In crypto systems, we have this challenge or big benefit that the actors, be it human beings or machines, are represented by addresses, wallet addresses, or NFTs, and we don't want to know even, and can't know, who's behind these addresses. And this is, on one hand, if you think of this user agency, freedom to act permissionless systems, this is a benefit, but also a challenge when it comes to, for example, what we've heard in the panel discussion just prior, where we'd like to rate how to distribute funds, what projects to support, and whom to trust in a sense, essentially. And this can be for funding, this can be for decision making, this can be for taking the next steps. Who is deciding on how our protocol should be shaped in the next iterations, in 2 years? And reputation is one concept to address this. Reputation in a sense that it still doesn't matter who you are and what passport you have. It's based on achievements, engagements, and skills. And this is looking at your past as an individual or even as a machine. Looking at what you have been doing in the past. And again, think about the goals here. In one hand, this is what we do today as well, right? It's interesting to hear, when we were back on stage, it's so interesting where you are coming from, what brought you to Web3. This is establishing trust, and this is the fundament of collaboration. Nevertheless, blockchains are immutable. So think of if all your activities in the last 10 years would be trackable and transparent. Maybe this is not something we could want. And reputation is the idea that in crypto systems, it's under your own control. However, you establish trust via proofs that become part of your reputation. And we'll dig in more in this workshop, where we'll explore the facets of reputation, and you'll be able to ultimately mint your own NFT proof of your knowledge about reputation. in this workshop. So bring your Ethereum wallet if you'd like to mint your own. So 3 examples for mechanism design. I hope this gave you some first impression of what token engineers do. Now to close, I would love to hear what are you most excited about at your job, maybe related to mechanism design or something else in the next weeks and months.
Yeah. Thank you. First, I'm just going to say about reputation. There's this concept you introduced me to Web of Trust, which inspires me a lot. So if you could also introduce that really quick, would be amazing. Because I think that's a really good thing to learn about, the Web of Trust networks, the biases of a trusted circle. If you could put one word maybe and describe what it is.
Yeah. So I mean, reputation is, or the necessity of reputation on blockchain systems comes from the lack of awareness of blockchains or smart contract systems of the real world. So it's unable to make adaptive or soft decisions that are responsive towards nuances of life. And so, how do we provide those things without actually creating too much rigidity that we can trap ourselves in? And Web of Trust is one very significant pre-blockchain proposition that is I think originally built with PGP, which stands for Pretty Good Privacy. It's like a private-public key pairing where agents can sign each other's public keys with their private keys, thereby forming a peer-to-peer social graph. So similar to following each other on Twitter or Lens, but more on a cryptographic level. Actually, Lens is probably on Web3 what comes closest to it. And yeah, I find that very interesting because it's kind of allows us to transcend this idea that a system is designed by an architect, but actually there are certain modalities where the system consistency emerges just by giving people a communication protocol and then allowing those compositionalities to assume certain functions.
Thank you. The reason I asked is because what excites me most is it's something called collaborative finance. Mm-hmm. It's what takes the agents and approaches agents concept from an entity level, where you can see the Web of Trust and this relationship of entities where imagine if you are in the text, you basically have a supply chain as we were mentioning, right? You are Zara, let's say, you buy t-shirts from someone, this confection company, and the confection company buys, it has its own vendors, it buys fabric, it buys different things from it. So within this circle, there is something called this obligation mechanism where, so let's say obligation could be, I owe Angela $10, Angela owes Jem $10, Jem owes me $10, so which means the total debt is $30. But if I can prove that I have $10 in my balance sheet, which would promise the circularity of this $10, then there's no debt. So which means that if we can access to a graph of these entities and the Web of Trust of these entities through production of goods and their the transactions, we can clear up to around 60% of the debt that exists in a supply chain, which we are trying to basically write this expand, create an alliance for collaborative finance. So I would say that's the part that excites me the most recently, these days.
Awesome, pretty exciting stuff to build.
Yeah.
And to close, I guess from what Alp just told us about these systems, there are some nuts to crack. And these mechanisms, since we hard-coded, have to be really robust. They take decisions on our behalf. They set the boundaries of our activities in such systems. And of course, it's hard to predict just by designing, writing down a mechanism. It's hard to predict how the system evolves. And a big part of what we are doing at TE Academy and in our community is building tools and training people in running simulations to stress test mechanism designs to understand, okay, in a certain scenario, how would this work out? Would the system still be stable, or would it quickly become imbalanced and then will fail. And this is something I would say where what we've learned in engineering, be it mechanical, electrical, chemical engineering, really helps us to design the systems of the future, the economic systems of the future, to tackle and handle this complexity. And we've all heard about negative side effects in technology. We have all heard about negative externalities in our economic systems. So I think we should be motivated to build better systems, to better understand what the effects of our systems might be and what the purpose of our systems should be. And we have been, over the past month, exploring how LLM agents can help us handling this complexity. And on November 30th, we will publish CAT-GPT. This is a dedicated large language models agents framework to support us in handling complexity of systems, to support our simulations process. And I'd like to invite you to take a look at this framework, to CAT-GPT, November 30th. You can find it on our Twitter, Talk Engineering. It's a pretty exciting next step in system design and cryptoeconomics. And that said, I hope to see you at 2 in the workshop. Let's talk about reputation. Let's mint NFTs. And thank you, Cem. Thank you, Alf.
Thank you.
Thank you.